It's another episode of Two Women Talking. We are the Two Women Talking. I am Tomboy, Leanna Kersner, and many, many other names people call me on the internet. And I'm here with Girly Girl, Song W. Erickson, writer and pundit extraordinaire in Force of Nature. We are talking this week. We're pivoting a little bit. This is based on feedback we've gotten over the weeks, and we're going to talk about a defense of toxic fandoms, a defense of toxic fanboys. And I think we have our different places on this one song, but I think we're both sort of in agreement that there's benefit to conversation, there's benefit to listening, and the way things have been handled regarding certain properties that have rustled jimmies hasn't been ideal. So I think we're probably going to range all over the place, probably, you know, Marvel, Star Wars, but with a side of probably, you know, Lord of the Rings and some Snyderverse, and we'll see where this goes. But do you want to set the board, or should I? Do you want to take the first, kind of be it resolved that?
I'm gonna let you.
Okay. So what I've seen, most of this has been, you know, I've been doing this for a while now. And obviously every so often you say something and it hits a button and people get mad at you. In this case, J.K. Rowling's flying monkeys got mad at me. And it's one of those things of, that doesn't mean they're right, but let's start separating the well-meaning people who just, in my opinion, are wrong from the loons. And I really try to make that distinction, because I think in every group, and I learned this with Gamergate, I learned this with Comicsgate, even though I stayed out of that one for my own sense of self-preservation. Yes, I do have one sometimes, but you know, there are different people. There are the people that are just clearly trying to, you know, whip people up and monetize the outrage. But then there are others with legitimate concerns. And the thing I found interesting about the whole She-Hulk thing is the subgroup of people who aren't going, this is the worst show ever, or, you know, they're just saying, this show bothers me, I feel attacked by it. And to me, that's the difference between somebody who's just expressing a legitimate opinion and someone who's being aggressive, and a productive conversation cannot be had. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that subgroup that tends to get lost. And now in the one She-Hulk, blah blah blah, brain crash there. They sort of predicted the outrage, and they've sort of worked the outrage into the experience and done this sort of interesting meta thing with it, that it was an interesting experiment tying into the fourth wall breaks that Jen Walters does in the comic. I think it maybe only 70% worked, because, you know, on the one hand, all right, yes, predictable female-led show of this kind, some people are going to get upset. But it did seem like they were actively tweaking people. And I think that because so many people have so many perspectives on media, I think that their intent to talk about, and this is just my interpretation of it, because of Titania as the sort of, well, it seemed like she was going to be the antagonist, but it seems like that's a bit of a fake out now. But, you know, with Titania as the foil antagonist, being like an influencer, like a Kim Kardashian type, I saw the whole thing as celebrity culture and just generally being a woman in the public eye who has a distinct appearance and a brand and all that stuff. But that's not the lens a lot of Marvel fanboys have on it. They think that all the internet stuff and, you know, the websites and all that stuff are about them, because that's their experience, because they're not going on, you know, tea spilling Twitter, because I followed all the Kim and Kanye drama. right? So that was my point of reference. It's the trumped up thing with Olivia Wilde and Florence Pugh on Don't Worry Darling. Like, that's what I saw. But it is true that when you do something like that, people draw their own references, to the point that the last episode before we recorded this, people thought the Doctor Doom homage mask in the video thing was a YouTuber who wears a mask based on Doctor Doom instead of actually Doctor Doom. And that was the point where I wept for humanity. You know, like the we're in an age where this stuff has been recycled so much that people don't know the sources for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean their opinion is invalid. It's just, you know, this is what they've been exposed to. There hasn't been, I mean, there was a really watered down version of Doctor Doom in that Fantastic Four movie a few years back, the one with Jessica Alba, I think. What's his name? Julian McMahon.
I think so. Yeah.
I like Julian McMahon. It was not a good take. It was not a good take on Doctor Doom. But yeah. So I think that there is a way to have some sort of discussion with subgroups of, you know, the people really angry about The Last Jedi or the Restore the Snyderverse types. And we don't have to like their opinions to reward someone willing to discuss in good faith. And to me, I'm saying that to defend my own opinions, which have been at times, some people would say polarizing, I would say ahead of their time. So, you know, I do think you have to protect unpopular and even unpleasant opinions. The question is, I think, how we do it. So that's where I'm coming from to this discussion from. What's your position? Where are you coming at this from?
From what I've noticed, and I actually got involved in all this through Comicsgate before it was Comicsgate. I wasn't around for Gamergate. So I was watching the videos and
when it was just the Make Mine Milkshake stuff?
I came in a little after that. And so there were some people who they got carried away from people saying mean things about them on Twitter. And so they said mean things back.
Right.
And then escalated. And, you know, I went to some friends who I actually met through comics. And I asked, you know, what has your experience with this been? And it was interesting, though, the friend I didn't ask, because we didn't meet through comics, I mentioned to him yesterday that we were doing this discussion, and he said, the thing you should add is, yes, there are toxic fans, but you cannot respond to toxicity with more toxicity.
Right.
And what I've seen is you get someone who will say something, and someone else will say something rude back.
Right.
And then it gets people on defense. And I think what especially happened with She-Hulk and with all these things that we've seen over the last few years is someone makes a criticism and someone says, I don't like this.
Right.
And they're labeled, you just don't like it because it's a girl. You just don't like it because it's this or that. And it turned into toxic fanboy until they dropped the toxic and they just said fanboy. And the toxic was automatically there. So they don't have to say it, but people say it and you hear it in your head. So the term fanboy has become synonymous with toxicity. And where does that leave all the actual fanboys who have loved these things, who have invested years of their lives into these properties. And I've talked about how I don't think it's right to build your identity on these external sources, but I will still defend the people who are like, who this was a safe space for nerds.
Yeah, well, I think, and it never was the safe space it was advertised as, but yes, that was what they thought it was.
And not even just the community, but it's okay, this is a property I like. I feel safe interacting with it. And suddenly someone else comes in and they start poking at it and prodding it and changing it. And people get bent out of shape because it's like, why are you doing this to this thing I care about? If you don't like it, go do something else. Now, we've gotten to the point where people are so triggered that they see anything new, they see anything that just like fanboy has become toxic or become synonymous with toxic, there's other things like LGBT characters, characters of color, other things, disabilities, where people are like, oh, that's woke. And it's like, not necessarily.
Yeah.
So both sides have become extremely trigger happy. But the side I honestly feel more sympathy for are the quote unquote toxic fans, because I feel like they've been pushed to it. Like, and to be clear, there is actual toxicity, and I don't advocate for that, and I'm not supporting that. But the guys who they just want to like what they like, and they've been labeled this, and they feel it's an attack, I do feel bad for them, because it's like they're just trying to enjoy this thing, and this doesn't help anyone. And yeah,
yeah, yeah, you made a lot of interesting distinctions there. The one that made me, let me just pick a point as an example to try to the one that really confused me with this whole thing. I come at it from when you said, race swaps and LGBTQ and all that stuff. To me, there's a difference between debating whether it exists at all and debating whether it's done well. Right. And I think a lot of the time it's not done well. The one that really surprised me the way it went was what's Reva, third sister on Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
Because when she first, I mean, I thought she looked great. I thought she was really great in the part. Moses Ingram, I've never seen her not be good in something. But I was like, wow, they're just leaning right into an angry Black woman stereotype.
That was the thing that amused me.
Yeah, that's bold, but that's not the way it went. And that's, and I thought ultimately it was, all of Kenobi, I think, was deliberately predictable. That it was sort of an homage story. I thought the Hayden Christensen's involvement was so overhyped. I was like, that's it? He's in this thing for 5 seconds? Seriously? I was hoping he'd get a bit of a redemption in terms of his acting ability. But
I was just glad to see the fans embrace him.
Well,
like, I felt so bad for him over the years.
And that's the thing that with Star Wars, having been around a long time, I'm an original trilogy kid. I had a little Yoda and a little R2-D2 growing up, but when those prequels came out, the original fans weren't happy at all. And there were always the which is better Star Trek or Star Wars brawls. And there was the stuff about don't call them Trekkies, they're Trekkers. Trekkie's a pejorative. And there's always been this sensitivity that I think has been misunderstood, because people think, modern people, analysts think it's the alt-right thing of they're copying leftist tactics in sort of a disingenuous way. But I know that these complaints existed before this whole modern culture war, so I can't get on board with that theory. It was always this, and what it was to me was the reality that yes, you could pay to meet these performers and you could pay to meet these people, but you always got the sense that they were just kind of taking your money and sneering at you behind your back.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that was true. I remember the first time I did an E3 with G4. I was there and we were watching everybody file in, and the person I was gonna do the segment with went, "Oh, look, nerds," and I missed the inflection. And went, "Yes, my people, hi guys," and I started waving, and that was apparently the wrong response. So it is sort of, and see, I come at it from both sides. It does get tiring to have to deal with awkward conversation after awkward conversation after inappropriate comment. It does get strange when people start telling you about the slash fic they wrote about you and somebody else. And this is the challenge with the type of parasocial relationship that fandom is cultivated, where it's part of the deal to go and meet people at these conventions. There isn't that arm's length that other stuff happens. The closest the closest there's been in anything else is daytime television, soap operas and stuff like that back in the day. I don't know if they do it anymore, but it used to be, they did these events where you could go and meet. I remember The Young and the Restless was big. Before that was Days of Our Lives. There was like that Days of Our Lives period in the 80s, and then there was like The Bold and the Beautiful and Y&R in the 90s, and you could actually go meet people, and there was this small subsection who thought they really were their characters, and so actors were getting smacked in supermarkets and stuff. Jack didn't treat Nikki right, so this old lady thought she had to do something about it, right? Poor actor.
I remember when Capaldi was cast for Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to say, if he'd been given better material, I still think he's my favorite Doctor because I loved his performance.
The intensity?
Yes.
Yeah.
It took a lot to outdo Tennant, who was my favorite before that. But I remember when he was cast, I was on Tumblr at the time, and someone posted a gift set of I think he was on the British version of Veep.
Yes.
Or some show.
Oh, he's been in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, but it was a bunch of gifs of him like cursing, and they're like, "This is who they cast for the family show Doctor Who," and it's like
family show.
But
okay.
Yeah, and I was like, huh? And luckily, people in the comments were like, "He's an actor. They're not gonna put swearing in the script. He can talk without cursing." But the way people get so fixated on these actors, I was actually talking to a friend about it the other day, where she's like, I don't understand adults who don't get that this actor is not the person they play.
Yeah.
And just the lack of understanding. Like, it's one thing in little kids, but it's, and we, especially I've seen it with the MCU and now with K-pop, especially, building up the fandom around these actors. And they're like, "Oh, it's Sebastian Stan did this thing that's just like Bucky." And I'm like, "Oh, God. Stop."
Bullet train towards typecasting, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny how which actors get those really rabid fan bases, because I watched the things trend for no apparent reason. And I don't believe these things are organic when things like that happen out of nowhere. That's some marketing somewhere.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting which ones get that sort of obsession. And
It's the broody boys,
but then it's
especially.
Wanda as well. Wanda Maximoff fans are psycho.
Yeah. I know I've told you this story. I don't know if I've mentioned it here on the show before. But I remember when Multiverse of Madness was coming out, and all these cosplayers and stuff I follow were like, "Oh, it's time for the Wanda Maximoff movie. It's really hers."
Well, yes.
And after the movie, I remember one of them commenting, someone asked, "Oh, how did you like the movie?" And she said, "It wasn't for me."
Right.
And they all went totally silent.
And I mean, she was great in it. I thought it was Wanda's movie. It was a proper Scarlet Witch story.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
But they couldn't handle
the moral ambiguity.
They couldn't handle, because it was this girl power thing. Like, oh, she's so powerful. And there were a lot of guys I saw, and it was actually what officially caused me to cut ties with the last bit of comics community I was a part of, when the Multiverse of Madness trailer was included as the secret ending of No Way Home.
That's right.
And I remember starting to see comments of, "Oh, this is going to be so woke. Wanda's taking over because, girl power, and she's a woman."
Because it was a scene where Doctor Strange was kind of working her a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like,
okay.
Wait. What could they put in the trailer? And these people in particular, they already didn't like her because they felt she wasn't properly punished after WandaVision. And there were people who were like, "Oh, she needs to be in jail." You cannot put her in jail because that will grind the whole story to a halt. You people don't understand writing. But
yeah, I get their point, but I agree with you in terms of structure. That we can get to the word punishment in a bit. I'll make a note of that, but finish your thought.
Yeah. So they were like, "Oh, this trailer, the movie's gonna be so woke." And I'm like, I'm sorry, what could they possibly put in a trailer that would convince you this?
Right.
And I didn't see the trailer for like a week. It took that long for it to be officially dropped. And I watched it, and I'm like, you guys are really just throwing a fit because a woman has a speaking role. And that's when
I actually thought that's what it was.
Yes. That was my thought. I remember sitting on my lunch break at work watching it and going, I was right. You people are just mad she has a speaking role. And that's when I cut all ties.
Interesting.
With that bit, because I've been watching it go this way. See, what started as genuine criticism and people who just felt they were being left behind and going, look, we just want to like the stuff we like, and we don't want to feel attacked.
Yeah.
Or like we're this big bad thing just because we want our cheesecake art, or we want our masculine heroes to punch stuff.
Right.
But because they kept being called sexist, they kept being called this, and people kept bashing them, and people kept calling them toxic, they became what they were called. And
yeah, there was definitely some of that it was cultivated to an extent.
Yeah. And part of it was because they started to form their own echo chambers, despite the fact that that's something that they were like, oh, all these leftist writers, they're in their echo chambers and yada yada. And I'm like, okay, but now you guys have started doing exactly what you get mad at them for.
See, that's the part that I get frustrated at, because these things barely get made. Like the idea that a show that it was affected by, the first 3 Disney Plus shows were affected by COVID. And I mean, you see where the ending of WandaVision just completely falls apart. It's clearly a reshoot. They were rewriting that thing as it went. The scripting on Loki was a mess. And obviously there's more of a story to that one because the writer keeps getting work. I don't know why. Falcon and Winter Soldier had to take out a whole subplot about a virus. And so that's kind of messy. I mean, the idea that there's some sort of agenda with this stuff. They have to lock stuff in.
Here's the thing. Not so much with the shows. I think Disney has followed this. There is this trend of female characters are not popular, but how do I say this? Like, feminism is a trend in a way right now.
It's funny because when I did my show Lady Bits, it was originally called A Gamer's Guide to Feminism.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to some marketing people at the time, and they said anything woman, like girl power, great. Feminism is the F word. Feminism is a toxic word. Don't use it.
Yeah.
Which I found really interesting.
Yeah. Not so much the word, but like that idea of girl power. I don't think Disney has a political agenda with it.
But they want to make money.
They're following trends.
Yeah.
And so is everyone else.
Yep.
Now, we did see it a bit more in the comics, I think, where you got female editors and writers who were specifically saying, okay, instead of using external secondhand things, Marvel got the Conan property back a few years ago. Now, from what I hear, the main Conan lines are great. My attention was caught, and this was like right as I was reading the books. So I was huge into Conan at the time. And they announced a second line, Age of Conan. Yes. And the first one they did was a mini series about Belit. With a cover by Sana Takeda. Mm-hmm. I was so happy because I love Belit. Mm-hmm. She's such a good character. She's a lot like Yennefer, actually, but without the trauma. She's just a brat who wants to bend the world to her. Anyway, so I was so excited. And then we started getting the promo, which wasn't much, but it was written by Tinny Howard. And she said, oh yeah, years ago, I rolled a pirate character in an RP game. So I'm just writing that story.
I don't know why anybody would say that out loud. I guess they think it's cute. I'm really careful about the origins of my characters because you can put people off that way. You got to give the space for people to see what they want to see in them.
Yeah. But even more, I'm like, okay, so is this actually Belit? Big question. I still would love to know, did she actually read Queen of the Black Coast? Forget the rest of the stories. Right. I don't know if she actually read.
Usually they do. They're provided the material to read.
Yeah. So I won't go into it too much. If anyone wants to hear my thoughts, I did very long rant videos on my YouTube channel for that whole series.
And here's where I want to draw the line, okay? Because I think people having their opinions, this is something I do not understand about the way it's gone, because I think people having a good rant on their own YouTube channel, that's great. If they're not on social media actually actively like fighting with people, like going to other people's channels and going, this is wrong, you're wrong, and flinging abuse, that's people are getting into things. People are passionate about things. I think that's great. People can make all the angry videos in their own YouTube channels they want. I don't know why people send me crap about myself. I don't care. I don't care what people say about me. I don't want to see it. I know people lie about me. I know people make shit up about me. Sometimes I have to act on it. Most of the time I don't, because people are entitled to their completely wrong opinions. Right?
Yeah. And it's like, I was really mad. Yeah. Because I love this character. And I don't like change. And I especially don't like it in characters. And that's why I don't like Zendaya's MJ, is because I'm like, but I want my MJ.
Okay, the the thing I
Have
like
changed
about
it.
Zendaya's MJ is at least they nodded by calling her Marie Jones instead of Mary Jane.
And you know what? She does a great job. And I will concede that. There's just still the part of me that I'm like, this is my favorite character ever. And I want to see her represented properly.
Right.
Which I will probably never get.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I had a conversation with somebody about the Kristen Dunst take on that character. And you know, the fact that and this is the other challenge, right? These characters have been being presented in very many different ways in serialized storytelling for decades. At this point, canonically, there are multiple versions of these characters, and any adapted property has to pick one, right? And they clearly went, the movies are clearly leaning into the kind of ultimate universe, victim of abuse MJ. I guess because they think that makes her more interesting. I have a bit of an issue with the more interesting angle. My attitude on that is the, you know, she's out of her your league, Pete. MJ is still there in the comics. And so I try really hard to just look at what something does on the screen and whether their adaptation makes sense for the story they're trying to tell. Because that Tom Holland film, the first one, it people forget how badly that Andrew Garfield run tanked itself by doing the death of Gwen Stacy. What were they thinking? They have these two characters with such great chemistry, and you do that in the second movie?
And here's the thing. Apparently, Shailene Woodley, I think that's how you pronounce the name, was cast to play MJ in the second Amazing Spider-Man movie. And so the theory I saw was that you got Gwen in the first one, and then you were going to get to see MJ and Gwen as friends before Gwen dies in the second movie.
Right.
And then MJ would be the love interest in the third, which is still a terrible idea.
See, I thought, oh, this is interesting. They're sort of leaving the character alone for one series. They're going to do an earlier Spider-Man with Gwen instead of MJ, but they barrel towards these things. The DC Snyder films had the same problem. They just tried to do too much at once.
Yeah.
And now people are going to get angry at me. And this is where I start going, no, this is where the toxicity actually kicks in. When people can't listen to another opinion, when they are so triggered by their own trauma that they can't listen to the fact that nobody's saying the movie is unwatchable. Nobody's saying it's all bad. They're saying there's a few things that, felt rushed or they tried to do too much. If people can't have a modicum of distress tolerance, don't expect anybody to want to have a conversation with you. That's my rule. Period. End of story. Right?
I think something a lot of people don't understand anymore is just because you like something, doesn't mean it's good. Something doesn't have to be good for you to like it.
Yeah.
Here's my confession. I love the Aquaman movie.
A lot of people do.
Now, granted, a large part of that is because shirtless Jason Momoa.
Yeah, that's why I don't connect.
But it's also, I do like the story. It did help that I had just read the Geoff Johns run before the movie came out.
Okay.
Because they released the omnibus of his New 52 run.
Right.
Like a week before the movie came out.
Well, that was smart.
I snatched that up and read it. And then we got to the movie and I'm like, oh, I see where you're taking all these elements. But it's also the story of a man becoming king.
Right.
And in case we haven't noticed, I love those types of stories.
I didn't mind that element. I mean, Aquaman's backstory, it's Camelot underwater, right?
Yeah.
And I did think it was interesting how, Jason Momoa, simply by the fact that he's Polynesian background, they had to be there was this different coding just by default, just based on that fact that made it less Arthurian, even though
Yeah.
his name is actually Arthur.
Yeah. And they still lean into it. Because like
I
they even
thought,
say, oh, that was the name of the great king.
yeah, I thought he was great.
He
I
was great.
just thought he had no chemistry with Amber Heard. And I said that at the time, and people were like, no, I thought she was good. And I'm like, no, man, she was supposed to be Belle in that scene on the surface, and she was freaking, I don't know what that was, the evil queen from Snow White. Like, what was going on? And it's funny because this is the complete opposite that we usually take. The romance fell flat in that movie, and so it just sort of sucked the air out. And I think that's because Aquaman writing historically has been so uneven. I'm not going to defend certain runs. When Aquaman's been terrible, it's been downright bad.
And I think it's something people struggle with Thor and even with the Inhumans in Marvel.
Yeah.
Because Marvel recently tried to downplay the Fantastic Four, and they were going to try and make the Inhumans the first family.
Yeah, that did not work.
And it's like, look, if you want to do this, you need to pull away from the superhero angle, and you basically need to go full Game of Thrones and invest in the politics of it.
Yeah.
That is the story you need to tell with the Inhumans.
Yeah, because I mean that's the same thing with Aquaman is Aquaman and Mera have had a very tumultuous marriage over the years, and I thought that would be a potentially interesting difference in a character. Give Aquaman something that's sort of interesting and unique, and not just the muscles. Not that there's anything wrong with muscles, but yeah, they just got an actress that clearly cannot pull that off, and I was so disappointed. And that I guess that has nothing to do with the movie itself, and everything to do with there's going to be a sequel, and unless they go completely, he leaves Atlantis again, and it's all this sort of underwater sea battle against Black Manta or something like that. I don't know. We'll see.
I hope not. But yeah. So my point is it good? No. Do I like it? Yes. And I can acknowledge that I like a lot of things that aren't necessarily good.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, not because it was a brilliant movie, just because it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I loved the Book of Boba Fett.
I enjoyed that show. Okay, compare that to Andor, which is just slow.
I have not even tried Andor.
So boring. And see, I think what's his name? The main character on that? I think he's quite pretty. He's easy on the eyes. But oh my God, it's not enough. It's so boring. That there's some very, very good bun hair game, but the hair is almost too perfect. They've digitally smoothed everything in the Empire. It's like nothing is happening on this show. And I compare that to Book of Boba Fett that people said was slow, but I'm like, no, this is just 70s pacing. Yeah. I'm good with the way Boba Fett kind of took its time to tell the backstory of this guy. It just, because for so many years we knew nothing about him, he was just a look, right? I like I mean, it's a what if, it's a bit of a fan fiction angle, but I liked it. I liked seeing the guy behind the mask, so to speak.
And I think part of the problem is because he's always been such a mystery, and we did get to see him a bit in the EU and the books. I never really read any of those stories, so I didn't become attached to it. But even then, I don't think most people are going off that. They just had this idea of what he was,
That's
this
right.
stone cold badass.
Yeah. And I
And so
thought he
that's
was.
yeah. And so then we get to this story of Boba Fett where he's human.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one thing people complained about the whole, oh, why is he caring about these Tusken Raiders who enslaved him and beat him? And I'm like, well, that actually has historical context
Yeah, it does.
because Native American tribes used to kidnap settler children. And usually it was because a member of their tribe had been killed. So they said, okay, we're going to take one of yours as restitution.
Yeah,
But so,
or that's the cover story because the settlers abandoned their child. The indigenous people took them in, and the settlers claimed they were kidnapped, but we'll never know for sure. I've heard both versions. But yeah,
yeah,
they do initiation rites.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have to earn your place in the tribe. And, you
Yes.
know, yes, they captured someone. He proved to be better than most people they captured. And they said, oh, we admire this. So we're going to welcome you in. And I think to say that that's totally implausible shows a lack of understanding of just how humans work,
See
which I
that
think there's a lot of that nowadays because it's like, oh, well, people did this. Yes, we've been doing that for all of history.
that to me was just somebody grasping at straws to explain either the disappointment or some other emotional reaction they had to 40 years of headcanon not coming true on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, that's an issue with some of these properties, and I think it's somewhat unavoidable, but I think people can be more self-aware. The thing about Star Wars in particular is there's been all this focus on the toxic fanboys, but the psycho fan girls in Star Wars are just as bad, if not worse. And I think that's driving part of the toxicity there. Because I mean, let's face it, Raylo fangirls, they're insane.
Oh my God.
They're insane. And I don't know how you come down on the guys in Star Wars, Rey's and Mary Sue. Yeah, that got annoying real fast. But
Yeah.
the Raylo fangirls, Kylo Ren is, I'm just gonna say it, he's a horrible piece of shit.
He
And the
is.
way they romanticized that guy and created this whole romance between him and Ray, which I think unfortunately the writers in the subsequent movies kind of fed. Like
They
that's
absolutely
scary to
did.
me. That's scary to me. Like he's
And
a piece of crap.
here's the thing. We see him in the first movie throw a temper tantrum
Yeah.
and completely
Yeah.
trash a control board. I'm sorry, what happens when he gets mad at you?
Well, did I ever tell you where I thought they were going with that character was?
I don't think so.
That in the scene where he allegedly kills Han Solo, it's a close
Mhm.
up. You don't see who actually hits the button on the lightsaber. And there was
Yeah.
this whole thing in extended canon where in order to complete your Sith training, I know he's not a Sith, I know they've stepped away from that, but
Yeah.
in order to complete the dark side training, you have to kill a loved one. You have to kill off your attachments. And so I thought it was going to be that Han hit the button himself, so Kylo Ren couldn't go through with it. It was not on his soul, and that ultimately, between Leia's sacrifice and Han's sacrifice, they finally worked together to save their son's soul. That's where I thought they were going with it, and instead it was this bullshit Japanese wannabe. Oh, he sacrifices himself, therefore he wasn't a complete piece of crap all along. Yes, he was. I'm sorry. And that wasn't the fanboys cheering that on. That was these lunatic tumblerinas who, for whatever reason, obsess over abusive men. I mean, see also fucking Sandman. Holy shit. Like, people are like, renew Sandman, and Dream's a dick, man. It
Yeah.
it that and I admit that one. I've been really careful because that's one of my I loved it as a teenager. There's a bit of self-loathing going on because I'm trying to figure out if it was always that bad and I just didn't see it because I was a teenager, or whether it is objectively worse. And I keep waffling. Right? I keep waffling between, yeah, those core elements of his personality of being a real dick were always there, but it's partially in how long it takes certain elements to happen in the story. It's also the fact that that was the 90s. We should know better now.
I think that's part of it. There is also this thing where even in comics, you can write a character, but it becomes very, very different when you have an actual human being playing that character. Like, even like, I couldn't stand Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, in the comics, but I love her in the show.
I think that's why. Well, I mean, they smoothed off a lot of the bumpy start of that character in the comics. Like, let's face it, that the comics started off as a little, we're going for teen whimsy, right? A little too hard. Whereas Imran, I forget her name, but she just, I mean, she just is that character. She's born so to play cute. That character. Yeah. And she is just, there's something very authentic about her that sells some pretty schmaltzy material. I mean, you could tell that show didn't have a huge budget, and they didn't expect it to really set the world on fire. It was a very soft launch. And
what's interesting to me is also, and this is going to be weird, in the comics, Kamala is very thin.
Yeah.
And honestly, so the actress isn't,
she's Zaftig.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's built the way Pakistani women are built.
Yeah. And so something about that made her so much better to me.
I thought it gave her a grounding that was nice to see. I mean, I liked that Black Widow, both the actresses were a bit on the fuller figured side, just because you can't live that way. And yes, they've got genetic enhancements and everything like that, but you can't live on the run and do that stuff and be like super duper skinny. I mean, I thought the fit on some of the costumes on Scarlett Johansson in the Black Widow movie were awful. I was actually like wincing for her. That white suit just looked bad. And those are the moments that I'm sitting here going, and this is going somewhere with the toxic fandom thing. Sometimes I think that the cynicism of that era of Disney has been misconstrued by the fan base as some sort of woke agenda, when really it was that they were including diverse characters under duress, and so they weren't developing them properly.
Yeah. Now, I do think at the actual comic offices, they did bring in people who did lean woke, and then they brought in more people because they hired their friends and stuff. Well, and they hired people who aligned with them.
They bring in people who lean woke because people who lean woke, people with political agendas, will work for cheaper.
Yeah.
They won't demand the same salaries because it's all about pushing their agenda. So they'll come in and work for free or low cost. It's not a belief in the political ideology. It's exploitation.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a big corporate agenda, but we do see it on the smaller end. And I understand guys who get upset when we see tweets from people like, oh, fanboys are so upset when I get my grubby gay hands on their characters, and I'm absolutely going to do this and that with them. And it's like, thank you for antagonizing them and just making them feel worse.
I understand both sides of that. You're right. I do understand, having lived through that, the many years where LGBTQ plus people were tortured at the hands of straight boys, and that it's not mature, but it's why, you know, the gay coded mid-redemption Marvel villains who are really just sad boys do come across as so LGBTQ plus coded because of that that snap, that kind of insecure viciousness. It's not right. It just is. You know, there's certain things of gay people of a certain vintage that you can't put a moral judgment on. It's a reaction, and that's the thing. Everybody's having a reaction, right? We're in the age of reactiveness.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Is one person says something, someone else responds, and then it spirals into this thing of toxicity. I think what bothers me, and this is a bit of a personal reaction as well. Something that bothers me about a lot of fangirls, because again, I was on Tumblr when
I lasted
The Force Awakens
on Tumblr. Yeah, 2 weeks.
I was there for 4 years.
Oh my God.
But I was there when The Force Awakens came out, and suddenly everyone was a Star Wars blog. And I got so sick of it. Like, even when I still liked the movie, I'm like, I need you all to shut up. I've seen this exact same gift set 50 times. And just everyone. But here's the thing. So I got into Star Wars young, and when I was like 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really into it. And then the prequels came out, and I was 9 years old, so I wasn't very discerning on what was good or bad. I saw Attack of the Clones in theaters, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing.
See, that's really who that movie was aimed at. I've determined.
And you know, it changed my life. I mean, I sent you a picture of this Padme paper doll book that I bought in a grocery store.
I remember those paper doll books.
Yeah, and it's like that was what first really made me realize, oh, I can like fashion and stuff like that. But you know, the thing that bothers me is I remember really being teased and mocked for liking Star Wars.
Yeah.
Especially by the girls in class. And I see a lot of the fangirls now, like even my sister is like, oh yeah, Star Wars is great. And I'm like, yeah, you hated Star Wars.
Yep.
When I liked it.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the comic books. Star Wars was just a big one that I remember being mocked for. And now those same people are the ones who are like, oh, Star Wars is so great. And I'm like,
yeah, fuck off.
Yeah. And that's why that's part of why I have sympathy for these fanboys, who people are like, oh, you're gatekeeping. And I'm like, sometimes I want to gatekeep all this too, because you're acting as if you know. I also have this thing, there's this line from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that I feel anytime I see people be like, oh, well, this and this, and I'm like, do not quote the old magic to me, which I was there when it was written.
No, the gatekeeping argument falls flat with me.
And it's like, a lot of times what gatekeeping is it's just, look, if you come in and you respect what the thing is, you'll usually be welcomed
eventually.
By
some.
True. But I mean, for the most part, people who aren't totally up their own ass and everything, it's like how they say, if you go to the gym and you're uncertain, go up to the biggest guy and ask for help, and they'll probably be the friendliest one and most eager to teach you.
That is true.
So it's like, you go to a comic shop, and you know, if you show that you're genuinely interested. Like, I did once have a coworker where I was talking, and I'm like, oh yeah, I like comic books, and he got a bit guarded and kind of, oh really? And I don't even remember what he actually I said Spider-Man was my favorite. Mm-hmm. And he got this kind of eye rolling, of course it is, you've seen the movies, right? And then I'm like, this and this in the comics, and he had a whole new respect for me. So like, if you can prove you're not just into the movies, people will have more respect. But then if you come in and you're like, oh, but the pinup art and the cheesecake is a problem, and why do the girls have big boobs? Because it's fun.
Yeah, because why? Because the guys have big boobs too.
Exactly.
You know, like, but that,
Yeah.
I mean, that element, it's funny because there's been a reversal now because me and Eileen, you know, Eileen from
Yeah.
Twitter, we're constantly with She-Hulk going, they're like, oh my god, it's this and that. They're pulling things from pop culture. It's like, no, it's this from the comics, and this is what Intelligentsia does, and it's a big tee up for Secret Wars and World War Hulk. Just holy shit, have you forgotten how reverent Disney is for source material? And the exact same people who were gatekeeping one way years ago are now going, but my feelings now.
Okay, here's the thing with She-Hulk.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that's bugged me a bit. She-Hulk, okay, so sexual expression in the 80s was very different from sexual
Yes. Okay.
expression
I'm
in
glad
2022.
I'm glad you're going here. Okay.
Yeah. And as far as I can see, the way She-Hulk is presented in, like, if twerking existed in the 80s, She-Hulk would absolutely have been twerking in the
yeah.
comics.
She's so ratchet.
Yeah,
She's so ratchet. Yeah.
I saw that clip and I'm like, okay, that's kind of out of nowhere. But then I thought about it and I'm like, that's totally She-Hulk.
Yeah.
That's exactly what she
yeah.
would do.
Yeah.
Now, it is a bit interesting. I was thinking about this yesterday. I will say I was not the biggest fan of the most recent episode.
With Daredevil.
Yes.
The
And
one
it
all
was
the guys
actually,
liked.
well, it's interesting. It's specifically because I didn't, it's one thing that the show overall is so goofy. And like I've kind of embraced it because it's fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't like some of the lines they put in Daredevil's mouth.
There was some, see, I think it was an editing thing that if they'd slowed some of those scenes down and really schmaltzed it, because
Yeah.
I thought it was such a Marvel thing where here she is, all these guys judging her for her appearance and all that stuff, and she meets a guy who's blind and he finally sees her, and they didn't spend enough time on that. But
No.
the show
And
is so hack edited that I didn't expect that.
well, it's interesting because the first time I actually discovered that Marvel Comics is this big contained universe was actually, and I was like 12 at the time, was actually a comic issue with Spider-Man and Daredevil.
Okay.
And like I don't think they really worked together, but like they were working on investigations kind of that crossed paths, and they ended up saving this little girl, and Spidey is swinging her home and Daredevil is like, I can hear her screaming from 5 blocks away.
Yeah.
I would kill him, except I know she's having the time of her life.
Yeah.
And so for me, Daredevil has always been one of those dark, somber characters, and I actually kind of liked the Ben Affleck portrayal. I know that's kind of heretical to say.
Okay, that movie was so bad, I found it entertaining. He played a
Yeah.
terrible blind person, like terrible.
Yeah, but so like that. So just they made him a bit too goofy for me personally. I liked them together.
Did you see the Netflix Daredevil show?
I did not.
Okay, because there was a bit of parody of some of his really clunky lines from that show, and if you don't have that reference, then yeah, it's not going to work. It's going to sound cheeseball.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it because I mean, now I'm watching House of the Dragon. I can handle things a lot better than I used to be able to. So, but I was like, no, that's too gritty and violent for soft little delicate flower me.
Yeah,
not so much anymore.
There's one really sensational action scene, and it's funny because it was in a hallway, much like the She-Hulk.
That's the one-shot one, right?
Yeah, the one-shot one. It's fantastic, and the problem with it is it's so good, the show never hits that height again. But the other thing about Daredevil that I found so poignant, but again, you only get this in She-Hulk if you've seen Daredevil, is that he was abused really badly by Elektra.
Yeah.
So the fact that they chose those two to sort of come together is ambivalent. And the fact that he's sort of there and gone, I hope they do more with Jen and Matt, because that could go either way. Either they could be really good for each other, or they will bring out each other's absolute worst tendencies.
Yeah.
Because they're both lawyers. It's a lawyer show.
Well, I mean, I'm still, I know it'll probably never happen, but I'm still holding out for She-Hulk and Hercules. Because like my favorite moment in Thor: Love and Thunder was honestly that secret ending teasing Hercules.
I was very stoked when they're bringing Hercules in. I mean, I'm not real thrilled about them bringing Eros in to the MCU. That could go really badly. But Hercules, yeah, that could be a lot of freaking fun.
Yeah. And basically, I want, that in Love and Thunder, there's that little montage of Thor and Jane's life and being basic and human.
Yeah.
Essentially. And I'm like, I want that for Jen and Hercules, just without all the drama.
Yeah, see, those are the moments, and I really like that about Love and Thunder. I want to see more of those moments. I want those moments where they're just trying to be human beings between conflicts, right? I'm actually interested in that stuff.
Well, there's currently at the grocery store where at my grocery store, there's currently a display for the Love and Thunder DVDs, and it says "New Thors, New Worlds, New Goats."
New Goats.
And I'm like, well, that is appealing to Liana. And
yeah, I love the goats, man. I love the goats. See, I'm a big fan of. I studied oral storytelling traditions in university. And so that's what I loved, because you watch these things morph, right? And that's what I find fascinating about comics is there's canon, and then there's people's head canon. And that's why I wanted to talk about the whole quote unquote toxic fandom thing and give people a bit of a break, because it is impossible. I've had movies where I just came out just fucking pissed because I thought they just shat the bed so hard. And I was getting so angry for a while that I actually had to say to people, if I don't think it's a good idea to see a movie, I'm not seeing a movie anymore, because it was like 3 in a row.
Well, that's where I got with Star Wars. I still have not seen Rise of Skywalker. I have no intention of ever seeing Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, I watched the Mahler video. I know what it's about.
I mean, okay, I'm all over the place on this one. Let me tell my angry nerd story, and then we'll tackle Rise of Skywalker, because I have thoughts on Rey that I have not previously expressed. Because it's not been the forum for it. So
this is the Two Women Talking exclusive, folks.
Yeah, there we go. The movie that really I spent 2 weeks in a depression after I saw X2.
Yeah.
And I couldn't explain it other than the fact that it was another female character. And I love those anti-heroes women who are allowed to do more than one thing, and they're not all bad. So Mystique was one, right? And Bryan Singer just turns her into this weird sex toy, and Rebecca Romijn looked great and she had this intensity, but the character is written, And then they did it again with Lady Deathstrike. And that fight between her and Wolverine was really, really good. But the fact that it was another mute woman, another woman who Bryan Singer had just taken away another woman's voice. And of course, I already knew about the rumors about him and teenage boys at the time. But the fact that an entire system in Hollywood let that movie do that. And that's the thing to keep in mind. Going after one person for something, it's not one person, it's an entire chain of decision making. Right?
Yeah, it's like when people try to blame M. Night Shyamalan for the whitewashing in the last Airbender movie.
Yeah, he
Like,
didn't do it alone.
No, and it's like he's Indian. Why would he do that?
It probably wasn't his call. A lot of the times it's not, right? And so I was just don't talk to me about that. And nobody wanted to hear why. Nobody cared. Oh, I thought it was good. Nobody wanted to know why I had issues with what they'd done. Wolverine's awesome. Well, that's nice. Why is, I felt the first.
This isn't the Wolverine movie. This is the X-Men movie.
Well, and it's in one of the first one. Like, why'd they combine Rogue and Jubilee? Why didn't they just go with Jubilee? And why is Jean Grey 45 and Scott Summers is 20? Like, what the hell? What's going on with this movie? This is all fucked up. And nobody cared.
Nobody... I remember reading the novelization of the first X-Men movie.
Yeah.
And there's a point where Scott actually, I think he's giving Jean a hard time about Logan.
Yeah.
But he throws in her face something about like a teenage boyfriend who had abused her or taken advantage of her.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's like, he just wants to get in your pants like that one boyfriend you had in high school. Or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And those novelization lines come from somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, they do. They usually come from the original script.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so there was that one. And then there was the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot where Scott and Uhura bang while he's her teacher. Yeah. This is just gross. This is completely unethical. It's not at all logical. This isn't Starfleet. There's no way, first of all, there's no way Spock would do that. But there's no way it would be allowed. I mean, this is both an academic and a military institution. Come on. And then the fucking Green Lantern movie.
I skipped that one.
Oh, God. People dragged me to see that Green Lantern movie. I knew I wasn't going to like it. I knew it was going to be a mess. But I want to see it. I want to see it. It's comics. Come on. You like comics. You like comics. I was so pissed. And I think there may be some of that going on, that people feel like this stuff's required viewing. And so then when it's not good, there's just this intense resentment towards it. Like, I know I'm choking my way through Rings of Power and I just can't. I'm too behind. Because that's another one where I actually think the show is anti-woke. I mean, Black Elf, you put him on a chain gang. That's great.
I think I said in the last one, I respect Tolkien a lot more than I actually like him.
Yes.
Just because I haven't been able to get into it. But it's because I have such a respect for him. And as a writer, and also just like I said, someone who I'm like, this is canon, don't change it. This is why I don't read any of the Conan pastiches. But
right. And even Conan has a bit more wiggle room than some of Tolkien's stuff does. He was pretty precise.
And he made it, what he did was absolutely incredible.
And in terms of world building, yeah.
In terms of world building and this timeline and creating this mythology for Britain. And I got into work the other day, and my coworker and my manager were both like, oh, do you like the Lord of the Rings? You should totally watch Rings of Power. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. Because I cannot stand to see the man's work used the way it is.
It just feels... And I know it's not amateur, it's professional, but it just feels like a very amateurish production. It feels like dinner theater, like really expensive dinner theater.
Have you looked at all into the showrunners?
Yeah.
They've never done anything, pretty much.
Yeah.
And there was an article recently where they actually said, oh, we're new to TV. We didn't realize that people expect everything to tie in together.
Oh, dear
And that
Lord.
everything needs to be part of the larger picture. And I just pictured them being shocked Pikachu face, like, everything needs to be connected. And I'm like, this is writing 101. This is why
yeah.
you spent 10 years writing screenplays that never got made, because you don't understand writing. Apparently I don't understand how they got this job.
That's what happens. These studios now, publishing's the same way. They've got these holes. They want people with the right biography to put in the holes. They think that this stuff just makes itself because the cinematography teams have gotten so good. And then you get somebody with little to no experience like Bryce Dallas Howard on Star Wars, and she knocks it out of the park. But okay, her father is is Ron Howard. Right? Like,
and she's also been a part of the industry for decades.
Yeah, but she's not coming out of nowhere on that one, right?
Yeah. And so just that, because I write a very big, expansive story, but I try to make sure everything ties in. A new character usually doesn't show up without being name dropped and referenced beforehand.
It's funny, when I read your stuff, my brain starts providing a soundtrack. It's that kind of writing.
Ooh,
my head is scoring the scenes, because she's running through the marketplace and slamming behind the doors and all that stuff. It's like I'm hearing the, like, I don't know, like Hans Zimmer like score in my head going on. What's going on? So yes, that is evidence of expansive writing.
Yeah. So it's like, but even I know it's like everything has to be connected. Everything has to weave together. You can't just throw in these disparate elements. How are you guys doing $1 billion show?
Well, because
you don't understand this.
Amazon wanted to throw $1 billion at something. That is my theory. The flex was Netflix is cutting budgets. We have all this money to throw at this thing. Now, if they do really aggressive recommends on shows that are actually good, like The Boys is one I really recommend, but they've got a few others that the Tom Clancy stuff is all right. I'm trying to think. Stargirl is on Amazon. Stargirl is excellent. So I'm really hoping that they'll use Rings of Power to push some of their other content, because that Rings of Power is designed to draw eyeballs. They wanted that water cooler show like Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Well, apparently Jeff Bezos' son is also a huge Lord of the Rings fan.
Okay.
And apparently he told his dad when he heard about it, he's like, don't mess this up.
Well, that's going to be an awkward conversation, though I'm not sure how much Bezos sees his kids anymore.
Yeah. So, but that was something my best friend told me about. So when we were talking about it, he's like, oh, Bezos is going to have fun explaining that to his son.